Today we are going to begin the Greek period by talking about two very early cultures in their history, which are the Aegean and Archaic cultures. To start us off, we are going to talk about a early culture which is known as the Minoans. The Minoans lived on an island that was south of the Greek mainland. It was an island named Crete. And their main palace was at a place called Knossos, which is on your map. It's Knossos. What we know about the Minoans is that more than likely they were a very peaceful but very rich culture. The reason we say peaceful is because when we examine the buildings that have been left over through time, these are structures that are not fortified, meaning that they were not intended to be used as protection. They do not have big, thick walls that would keep outsiders from coming in. So because of that, the best guess is that they probably were quite peaceful. How the Minoans made their money is through trading. They are an island, so I think that makes perfect sense that they would travel back and forth to the Greek mainland and trade goods there. We really do not know what happened to the Minoans. The best guess is that around 1500 BCE, when they disappeared entirely, that it was probably due to a volcanic eruption. But again, this is just a hypothesis. No one knows because nothing was actually written down at that time. One of the best stories in relation to the Minoans is actually the mythical king that they are named after, which is King Minos. There are two different versions of the story about Minos. The first one is that he was a very good and very just king. He wrote their democracy, and constitution, he kept up with how people were treated, and just on and on. He basically was supposed to be a very kind king. And because of that, when he died, he was given a very special place in the underworld. The Greeks believed that everybody went to the same place. There was no division between heaven or hell. Everybody went to the underworld. And then you were judged by Hades, the god of the underworld, on the life that you had led. So the story is that he was made into one of the judges of the underworld. That story is fine, but to be honest, the best story about Minos is that he was actually a very cruel tyrant. So the story about him being a tyrant, you really have to go to the next part of this, which is the story of the Minotaur, because it is associated with Minos. Minos had a son, and his son had traveled to the mainland. He had gone to Athens. And while in Athens, he participated in a competition. He was killed while he was facing a bull. Minos, when he got this news, he was very, very upset. He actually blamed Athens. He blamed the king. He blamed its people. What's special about Minos is that Minos is actually one of Zeus's children, Zeus being the supreme god, the god of lightning and thunder. So when his son was killed, Minos went to Zeus and he asked him to punish the Athenian people, which is exactly what he did. He sent a plague. To understand what happens after this, I do have to tell you what the Minotaur is and how it actually came to exist. As you can see from the pictures, the Minotaur is half bull and half man. When Minos originally wanted to be king of Crete, he was in competition with his siblings. And in order to prove that he was the right choice as a king, he decided that he needed some sort of holy or symbolic item or symbol that would prove that. So what he did is he actually went to his uncle. He went to Poseidon. Poseidon is the god of the sea. He is associated often with earthquakes. He went to Poseidon and he asked him to send a symbol that would help him out. What Poseidon did is he sent Minos a snow white bull. It was a very beautiful, very perfect creature. The agreement was that when Minos became king, he would sacrifice this bull in honor of Poseidon. Well, he becomes king, and then he decides that he just can't get rid of this bull. He can't do it. It's too beautiful. You learn very quickly in Greek mythology that when you disobey the gods, you are going to be punished. What happened is that Poseidon made his wife, Minos' wife, fall in love with the bull. So we actually get a story of bestiality here. To put it very nicely, she copulated with the bull, and the product of that was the Minotaur. The Minotaur is always described as a very hideous, monstrous creature. It actually feeds on human flesh and blood, and it is so dangerous that Minos actually built the labyrinth to put it in so that it would not be able to harm the citizens of Crete. Now we get back to the story of what happened in Athens. So he asked Zeus to punish the Athenians because his son died, and he did that. When the citizens wanted to make it right, they wanted to make the illness go away, they asked Zeus what to do. And he said, well, go ask Minos. What happened is that Minos said that in order to compensate for his dead son, he would make an agreement. Every 9 years, the Athenians had to send a boy and a girl, 7 of each, to be sacrificed to the Minotaur in the labyrinth. The person who eventually defeats the Minotaur is a Greek hero named Theseus. Theseus is famous because of the fact that he goes to Crete, and while he is there, he basically challenges the Minotaur. At the same time, Minos had a few daughters, and they both fell in love with Theseus. They helped him defeat the Minotaur. What they did is they gave him a ball of yarn so that when he would go into the labyrinth, he would be able to map out where he had been and how to get out. He eventually beheaded the Minotaur. So that is the story of Minos. It's the story of the Minoans. It's quite interesting. And how it applies to their actual culture is the fact that we do have a lot of frescoes from the walls of their palaces, and we also have some of the palace itself. If you look at this image, you see that there is a bull. They believe that the bull was actually worshipped by the Minoans because it shows up so frequently in their art. You also will notice that there is a male figure who, if you start from left to right, basically what it is he's grabbing the horns of the bull, he is flipping himself onto the back of the bull, and then he lands on the right-hand side on his feet. They believe that this might have actually been a real ceremony, sort of a coming-of-age ceremony that they would perform. And that is why they call it Cult of the Sacred Bull. If you think about a bull, it's a very strong animal. It's got a very strong character because of its temperament. It's an animal that they would definitely want to worship. The palace also ties into the mythology because it is actually built as a labyrinth. It is multi-storied and multi-layered. And basically, if they protected themselves, this is how they did it. Because if you were unfamiliar with the palace, you would get easily lost. In the center is where they actually placed all of their money, all of their treasured goods, all of their crops. So it would be very difficult to actually rob this palace. It would be very difficult to be able to figure out how to navigate it. You will also notice in the picture on the right that there are columns. They actually made their columns out of cypress tree trunks. It's a little different from the Greek column. I think we know the Greek column is made of marble, and it also has more decoration. But the palace itself was very advanced. It had indoor plumbing. It had a water system that was in place. So this is definitely an advanced culture considering how very old that it was. Now we are going to go to the other very ancient culture, which are the Mycenaeans. The Mycenaeans were on the mainland. They're about 90 miles south of Athens, and they are called the tamers of horses. which I'll explain that. Basically, the writer Homer, the writer who is responsible for the Iliad and the Odyssey, he was from this culture. And he described them as tamers of horses because when they would fight, they were always they were in chariots. And because they could control horses with their chariots, that's why they were known as tamers of horses. They were very different from the Minoans. These are very aggressive conquerors. Again, we know this because their palaces are fortified. They have these big, thick blocks, big protective walls. They also strategically placed their cities where they were usually atop hills where they could see all the way around them. We do not know what happened to the Mycenaeans. They did disappear about 1200. The best guess is that they probably more than likely were conquered by another group of people. That's the downfall of being aggressive and getting all your goods by taking over other cities. Eventually somebody's going to take you out. The Mycenaeans are particularly important because most of the mythology we have about Greece and the stories, it comes from this culture. And when I mentioned Homer, that's really key because Homer is going to be one of our best documentarians of what life was like in the ancient Greek world. To show you very quickly their palace, this is the Lion's Gate. You see that there are two lions atop the entrance. You notice that the blocks are very thick. That is what I said when I meant that they have this fortified palace that's very strong and protective. The lions also are strategically picked because if you think of a lion can be viewed as king of the jungle. It's a strong animal. It's a courageous animal that also fits the image that a civilization would want to give off to others to kind of ward them away from their cities. The Trojan War is probably the most famous story we have from the Mycenaeans. I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about this, and then we will talk about Homer's version, which is in the Iliad. Basically, the Trojan War started because of a dispute that happened between three goddesses. It was Hera. She is Zeus's wife and also his sister. She's the goddess of family and marriage. It was also Athena. Athena is the goddess of wisdom. She helps with strategy and war. And also Aphrodite, or as the Romans called her, she was Venus. And she is the goddess of love. What happened is that there is a minor goddess who showed up, and she's called Eris. Eris is known as the goddess of discord. So everywhere she goes, she causes chaos. What she did is she gave them a golden apple and said that the apple was intended for the most beautiful goddess. Well, obviously this caused a huge dispute between these three women, and they needed someone to judge. They originally went to Zeus. Zeus was very bright. He decided to opt out of the judging contest. He knew he could not pick against his wife particularly, or he would be in a lot of trouble. So he said, you need to find someone else. They eventually picked a human. They picked a human male. It is Paris, and Paris is a prince that is from Troy. He decided to pick one of the goddesses, but I'll tell you, it was done very unfairly. Each goddess actually bribed him. Basically, Hera offered him all the land in Europe and Asia. Athena promised him that he would never lose a battle. And Aphrodite went with what she knew, and she promised him the love of the most beautiful woman in the world. Paris, who is known to be a bit vain, he actually opted to pick the girl. The problem is that he picks Helen. Helen is a married woman. So this is a problem. And the story is either she leaves willingly or she's kidnapped, but she goes to Troy with Paris. And that's what the entire war is about. It lasted 10 years, and it's all about getting Helen back because her husband had been disrespected. The war ends, you see the image on the right with the very famous Trojan horse. Basically, the Greeks were fighting against Troy, so Troy is kind of by itself. They built this huge horse, wooden horse, and it was hollow inside. They gave it as a peace offering. What they really did is that there was a opening at the bottom and they climbed inside of it. And when Troy opened their city gates and took in the horse, they waited until nighttime and they crawled out while everyone was sleeping and they slaughtered the entire city and burned it to the ground. So Troy actually loses the war. Homer is the best authority about the Trojan War. And to point out very quickly, we do not know a lot about Homer. They did not keep autobiographical records during this time. So the reason I put Homeric question is because there are groups of people who believe Homer is entirely fictional. And then there are other people who argue he was real. If he was real, he was more than likely what they call a bard. A bard is a person who travels from city to city and they tell stories for money. Some of the bards were singing bards. One of the other stories is that Homer was actually blind. People who are blind in Greek stories usually are very prophetic. They have a third eye and they're able to foretell the future. The two epic poems that we are left with is the Iliad and the Odyssey. And you can look at the Odyssey as a sequel to the Iliad because it follows the Trojan War. What to know about everything I'm telling you about Troy is that we're just not really sure what's real and what's not real. There's been no evidence that Troy was ever a real place. There's no evidence that a Trojan War ever occurred. There have been a few sites found that people say that that's definitely where it was, but we just really don't know. And again, nothing was written down until centuries later. The Iliad is the main focus of what I'm going to tell you about Homer. This is about the Trojan War, but it's only about the last few days before the war ends. The main character is not Paris. It's not Helen. It's actually Achilles. Achilles is a demigod, so he's part god and part human. His mother was a goddess, and from the moment that Achilles was born, she learned that Achilles is actually fated to die. Usually in Greek stories, when someone has a prophecy about their future, what you usually see happen is that characters try to avoid that future, but usually find out that if you're prophesied to do something, you will do it. That's exactly the story of Achilles. He's fated to die in the Trojan War. They do not make any surprise about that. They tell you very early. What happened is when he was a baby, you see the image on the left here, his mother took him to the underworld and she dipped him in the river Styx, which is how people are transported to the underworld. There are magical qualities about the water. When she dipped him in, she held him by his heel. And this is how we get the term Achilles heel. He is protected on everywhere on his skin but his heel. It's the one place Achilles can be killed. The gods and goddesses will take sides during this war, and it will be Apollo's arrow, because Apollo is the sun god, but he's also a god of arrows. He will guide the arrow that eventually fatally wounds Achilles. What happens to the Iliad is that Achilles is probably the best Greek warrior out there. The best Trojan warrior is named Hector. He is Paris's brother. And Achilles, as he has been winning victories, he has been taking war prizes. This was very common at this time. War prizes can be gold, but it also can be money. And Achilles claims a young girl named Briseis. What happens is that the king at this time, he becomes very jealous of Achilles and these war prizes. His name is Agamemnon. He's the king of the Mycenaeans during this time. He actually takes Achilles' war prizes away from him, says that he's too boastful. This is a period known as where Achilles broods, or he sits in his tent and he stews. There is a man who came to war with Achilles, and his name is Patroclus. Patroclus grew up with Achilles. They're very good friends. And he decides that the only thing that the other side needs to see, because as Achilles steps out of the battle, the Trojans begin winning victories. They don't see Achilles. They're not scared. Patroclus looks at Achilles' armor. It's armor that was made by the gods. It was made by the craftsmith god named Hephaestus. He decides that all they need to see is just the armor. They'll think Achilles is back and they'll run away. Patroclus puts on the armor. He steps on the battlefield. He's not a bad warrior, but often Achilles protects him. No one's Achilles. Hector, who has been looking for Achilles, he sees the armor and he engages who he thinks is Achilles in battle. He kills Patroclus, fatally wounds him. What's important to know about this prophecy of Achilles is that Hector is linked to it. The prophecy is that if Achilles kills Hector, he will die. What happens is that when he finds out his friend has died, he goes into an absolute rage. This is known as Achilles' rage. He suits up, he goes on the battlefield, he's unstoppable. And his one goal is Hector. He has to kill Hector to get revenge. There is a lot of research about the relationship of Achilles and Patroclus. I'll mention just very quickly, there are some people who just say it's definitely like brothers. And then there's another side that will actually tell you that there was a romantic relationship between Achilles and Patroclus. So it's very interesting. What happens is that Achilles meets Hector in battle and he does kill him, setting in motion his own death. When he kills Hector, you see the image on the right here, he actually ties Hector's body to the back of a chariot and he rides around the walls of Troy, dragging his body. This is very disrespectful because the dead need to be buried and get proper rituals and rites so that they can pass to the underworld. The only way that he actually stops is the old king of Troy. His name is Priam. He comes out and he's able to convince Achilles to give him the body of his son to be buried. So you get a break where everyone buries their dead. What happens to Achilles, how he dies, is that Paris, Paris is very uninvolved. He sits in the palace with Helen. He sort of looks at himself in the mirror all the time. Again, very vain guy. He's the one who gets the big war prize. He is the one who shoots the arrow. Apollo guides the arrow into the heel of Achilles, and he dies at the end of the Iliad. So it is very much a tragic story. But this is the best account we have of the Trojan War. It comes from Homer. I am only going to briefly mention the Odyssey. The Odyssey is based on the story of Odysseus, who was a warrior who fought with Achilles in the Trojan War. This is about his return home. He's from an island called Ithaca, and he has been away from his family for 10 years. So he's trying to get back home. It will take him actually another 10 years to get home, and it's because Odysseus has a character flaw. You see that I have this term up, which is called hubris. It's really important to know what hubris means and how it plays into the story. Hubris is an individual who has excessive pride. They are so boastful that it leads to getting in trouble. That's actually what happens to Odysseus. He angers Poseidon, the god of the sea. And if you're sailing back home, that's probably not the best idea. But basically what he does is he ends up blinding one of Poseidon's children, which is the Cyclops. You see an image of the Cyclops on the left. They actually had landed on the island of the Cyclops. They were captured by one of the Cyclops named Polyphemus, who had locked them in his cave and was slowly, day by day, eating Odysseus's men. They found a piece of wood in the cave. They sharpened it to a point. They stabbed his eye out, and they were able to get out of the cave because Polyphemus actually herded sheep. So if you imagine this vicious Cyclops who actually herds sheep during the daytime, it's actually kind of a funny image. But what they do is that every day he lets his sheep go out. They tie themselves to the bottom of the sheep, and they're able to get out of the cave. The reason hubris is a problem is because when he originally was asked his name, Odysseus lied, and he basically gave Polyphemus a name that means no man or no one. But as he is getting ready to sail, Polyphemus comes running after them. He is in a rage, can't see, and Odysseus has to brag. He cannot help it. He wants him to know his name, and he actually admits that he is Odysseus. Polyphemus goes to his father and tells Poseidon, and Poseidon blows Odysseus's ship way off course. So that is why it takes them 10 years to get back home. They encounter a lot of mythical creatures, particularly goddesses, who do all types of evil things to them. So it is a sequel to the Iliad because you have a connecting thread. It's the Trojan War and then the end of the Trojan War. I do want to talk a little bit about their religion since that is so core to their value system. The Greek idea of creation is that out of chaos or out of nothing came two gods. One is Uranus, who is the sky god, and the other one is Gaia. Gaia is Mother Earth, or she is an earth goddess. These two together actually create the very first generation of gods. They are known as the Titans. The most important Titan is Cronus. Cronus is married to his sister, Rhea, and there's a prophecy about Cronus. Basically, Cronus got the throne by overthrowing his own father. He actually castrated Uranus. And if you look at this image of him, he's actually holding in his hand a sickle. He commonly is shown like this because that is what he used to actually castrate his father. So his prophecy that he hears is very similar, that when he has children, one of his children will grow up and will actually overthrow him. What happens is that every time Rhea has a baby, Cronus actually eats the child. So you can see this horrible image on the left of poor baby Poseidon being eaten by Cronus. Eventually, poor Rhea, she's lost so many kids. When Zeus is born, she actually hides Zeus. And she gives Cronus instead a rock or a stone that is wrapped in swaddling cloth. And that is what he swallows. So it's very, very different from the other kids. That's what makes Zeus special. Because Zeus is the one who grows up, he comes back, and he overthrows his father. How the other siblings come back is that he gives him a potion that makes him very sick, and Cronus basically regurgitates the children. So, lovely image. But they grow up and they get rid of their father. Hence, we get the era that is known as the Olympians. The Olympians are the gods that we're more familiar with, like Zeus, Poseidon, Hades. Each god and goddess are very human as far as their personality and their characteristics. This allowed the Greeks to understand them in a much easier, simplified way. And a lot of the myths about the gods can be traced to these ancient cultures that existed even before them. Most of the gods and goddesses represent natural forces, like Zeus is sky, Poseidon is sea. We have fertility goddesses. We have gods that are linked to the land in different ways, and also to animals. Tell you very quickly about our main gods. We've already mentioned Zeus. Zeus is the sky god, or also lightning and thunder. More importantly, Zeus is also a womanizer. He is not very faithful to Hera. He has actually fathered multiple children by goddesses and also by human females. We have Poseidon, who is the god of the sea. He is often seen with his trident, causes earthquakes, typhoons. Then we have poor Hades, who I think gets the really raw deal. When they divided up the world, how they were going to rule it, Zeus got the sky, Poseidon gets the earth, and then poor Hades gets thrown into the underworld. In fact, people hate the underworld so much, and they were so afraid of him, that to get a wife, he actually had to go kidnap his wife. Her name is Persephone. And he brought her to the underworld, and he tricked her into staying by having her eat food. Once you eat food from the underworld, you can't leave. So he's just kind of a pitiful guy altogether, but he's the god that they believe the Greeks probably feared the most. We have also Athena, who I've already mentioned. She is the goddess of wisdom, and strategic warfare particularly is what she is known for. Athena is actually one of the daughters of Zeus, and she's usually known as a virgin goddess. She's also the protector of Athens. That's why the city is named after her. We have Ares, who is the god of war, And we have Aphrodite, who is the goddess of love. They're very much connected because Aphrodite is married to the blacksmith god, which is Hephaestus. And he is known to be disfigured and deformed. And Aphrodite apparently really hated him. The story is that her and Ares were actually having an affair. So there's all these sort of funny, great stories about her husband trying to catch Aphrodite and Ares in the act. And she kind of looked at Ares as like the bad boy that she was really attracted to. We have Apollo, who I mentioned is the one who guides the arrow that killed Achilles. He is the sun god, but also is associated with arrows, also with art and music. Hera is Zeus's wife and sister. She's the goddess of family and marriage, and she is always insanely jealous over the relationships that Zeus has with other women. And sometimes she actually tries to kill the other women and also the children that are a product of that. Hermes is an example of that. Hermes is one of Zeus's children. Hera actually tried to have Hermes killed when he was a baby, and also his mother. So he was hidden when he was just a child. The Olympic Games, I want to briefly mention this, they're associated with the Greek gods and goddesses because on Mount Olympus, they believed that this is what gods and goddesses did. They actually competed in athletic competitions to prove who was most powerful. And they applied this to their own world. That is why they actually created the Olympic Games. The first temple was dedicated to Zeus and Hera. It started in 776 BCE, and the first event was a 200-yard dash. The reason the Greeks really loved the Olympic Games is because it was bragging rights. If they won, they could say that their city was the best city. It was the strongest city. They had the best warriors. It's not very different from our concept today, country against country. We still like the bragging rights of who has the most medals. First place actually got a laurel wreath on their head, and they got usually free meals for life or just were celebrated as a hero from their city. There was no second or third prize, so no silver or bronze medals. I do want to point out the term gymnos. If you notice from Greek art, a lot of the time the males particularly are in the nude. The reason why is because they saw the male body as beautiful and perfect. So when we see these images of them in the nude, the term gymnasium, it actually comes from a Greek word, which is gymnos. It means naked. So technically when you're in the gym, that's what you're supposed to do. That's according to the Greeks, is take your clothes off. They viewed this as the perfect male form, and they wanted to see the male form in action and in motion so that they could appreciate the masculinity. The end of the ancient cultures occurs for a couple of different reasons. They believe that some of the civilizations simply died out from natural disasters or illness, but a lot of people believe that they were conquered. What happened is that there's this gap known as the Dark Ages, where people went from living in the cities, such as Athens, and they moved out to the countryside and became very simple farmers. During this time, there is no creativity whatsoever. There is this big void. There is no writing. They actually believe writing was lost, and no building, no art, nothing. It is going to take some time before we get to the period that we really call the classical Greek period, which is the height of Athens' power. So that will be the next discussion that we actually have, is about this height of sort of golden classical Greek era and what Athens was able to add to the equation.